LaToya Ruby Frazier. I'm a visual artist from Braddock, Pennsylvania. I make work through photography, video, and performance, dealing with the steel mill industry and healthcare inequality and environmental toxicity and pollution in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Growing up in Braddock, Pennsylvania, there is no historic account or visual representation of women working in the factories or women from the steel mill town, and there also was not a visual record of Black Americans' contribution to the history of the town, nor were there any stories being told about the last 30 years of disinvestment once, we were affected by the Reagan administration's policies, which were, global economy and environmental pollution and, oppressing working class people. And so because of all these things, I decided, for my own survival, really, to make the photographs and to tell the story myself. Because no one was speaking up for me, so I decided to speak up for myself. So my family became a springboard for talking about larger universal issues that everyone else was dealing with in the town, like healthcare and loss of employment, as well as the rise of the gentrification of the Rust Belt in America. So my family is simply, we're like stand-ins, where as an audience member, whether you're from Braddock, the US, or from Europe, by looking at us, you should be able to, see yourself and see your family, because these are all universal issues that deal with love, loss, death, inequality, social justice, history. And so, when you look at the history of photography, seldom is there a record of a documentary artist or filmmaker telling the story from the inside. And so, as a social, political, and educational move, I use myself as the subject along with my mother and my grandmother to tell this very intimate story versus always being told, about yourself from the outside. Like, what would it look like from the inside? Well, my work is very influenced by a few different movements. The aesthetic, one of the ways that I look at the aesthetic is my love for Baroque painting. Looking at Johann Vermeer's paintings, this is over 2 decades of paintings of women standing in a corner, what does it mean to keep making the same portrait of a woman for decades, with all these different still lifes, which is a comment on that woman's place in society and her place in art history. So, collaborating, making those portraits with my mother and my grandmother has its art historic references. And of course, because I'm interested in painting, it brings in the whole allegorical and extra narrative, which sometimes causes the images to move from like human documents into somewhat of a surrealism kind of feeling. Because the images move freely between still life, portraits, and landscapes, they have more of a cinematic quality. They're more like a living tableau. Which allows the viewer to kind of engage on like the imagination in the narrative, or to deal with the brutalness of the images, which is, us documenting our bodies deteriorate with the social and economic fabric of the city. My work is really influenced by looking at early 20th century social documentary. What I wanted to do was update that whole period, because postmodern critique looks at social documentary as invaluable. And I actually see a lot of value in looking at social documentary currently with the crisis of redeveloping the Rust Belt. Someone has to document the change. This is very much in line with someone like Lewis Hine, who gave the United States the archive called the Pittsburgh survey, shot in 1907 and 1908, that shows the conditions of steelworkers and their families and their living and working conditions. If it wasn't for that, there wouldn't have been any social or economic reform. But then the work itself moves into looking aesthetically at someone else like Gordon Parks, who was the only black photographer who was part of the FSA in the 1930s, but he also happens to be a filmmaker. He shoots fashion. He's very interested in, you know, the poetics of it, right? So art that's a document, but art that expresses a visual feeling and meaning. And then my work moves from the 1930s into the new topographics, kind of looking at those landscapes in the 70s, just shooting how man engages with the natural environment and how industry destroys and pollutes the environment. And then the other movement that influences my work, which brings more of a conceptual realm to it, is looking at the pictures generation of the 1980s, which are artists that are very aware of the culture industry. So they're artists that critique Hollywood, they critique mass media and news and print. They don't allow propaganda from the government to tell them how to feel about race, class, gender, and citizenship. One of the driving questions behind the gelatin silver prints and the black and white aesthetic in my work comes out of my first encounter with seeing Dorothea Lange's Migrant Mother. This is an iconic image that has become such an icon that people forgot that this was a real woman with her children living as a pea picker, completely impoverished. That's what pushed me to make the work with my mother and my grandmother. So my question that started the whole body of work was, if Florence Owens Thompson, the woman and migrant mother, could make her own portrait and speak for herself, what would that portrait look like? So, you know, collaborating with my mother is a political strategy. We are taught in the education system that disenfranchised people or people of color cannot author and write their own stories or make their own work. And it is my belief that if we want to get the history correct, and if we want to be able to move forward past racism and segregation, we have to tell our own stories. But we cannot afford to wait on the media or politicians or the United States government. We can't wait for them to tell us. We have to be setting the terms and dictating this. So in addition to the United States Steel Corporation polluting the landscape of Braddock, which caused all the terminal illnesses and the injuries to the residents' bodies, it also happens to have become the story to the redevelopment of the town, where Hollywood and advertisement firms and corporations like Levi Strauss, the clothing company of the US, has come to Braddock to rebrand it as the new frontier. Coincidentally, when Levi's rolled out their campaign saying, everybody's work is equally important, go forth, Braddock is the new frontier, at that same moment, the community lost its largest employer and its only healthcare provider.
What I felt an urgency to do at this moment is to really return back home and to really do something, not as the artist LaToya Ruby Frazier, but as a citizen of Braddock, Pennsylvania, LaToya Ruby Frazier, as a citizen, do something about what they've done to my community.
And all the coverage about Braddock was about the Levi Denim campaign, which happened to have the CEO claiming that their campaign's aesthetic was about social documentary photography. And this can't be possible because denim and fashion and a lifestyle doesn't correct the wrongs of millions of workers who died because they were injured at their job, had health-related illnesses, and you know, were living impoverished. And so not only did Levi get the idea and the concept wrong, they also went as far as to also have a statement about the history of denim on their corporate website, saying that Nîmes is not the place where denim originated. And so I found it very interesting to be invited to Nîmes to learn about the history of denim and to collaborate with people that are working in textile, creating denim, to make these pieces that kind of collapse that argument on itself. And so that's where the pieces come from, where I'm printing these performative images about capitalism over top of denim fabric, which is a complete critique of Levi's creating this fictional neoliberal narrative about young hipsters who don't do work, wearing denim as a lifestyle. You know, what my work is calling attention to is like this urgency of how America fails through capitalism to understand the workers' needs. And then after those workers are discarded and their bodies now don't even have health care, how are we going to deal with this? Like, what is the solution to it? Currently, Braddock was given an urgent medical care facility, but that's still not enough to help with the elders who I collaborated with in the campaign for Braddock Hospital, Save Our Community Hospitals. The healthcare system has now taken over the United States Steel Corporation's position. They're just as powerful as the US Steel, and I'm also making that connection in the work and critiquing both of them by using my documentary practice to uplift the voice of the people protesting against both companies.